Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Neurodiversity Gold podcast with me, Jude Morrow. This is the podcast where neurodivergent stories are pumped out under the airwaves. We're putting a roof over the neurodivergent community and calling it a big, happy, smiley place. So, I just wanted to give a big shout out to everybody who's been listening and downloading the show. This has been our best series so far to date, in both reviews and in downloads and listenership. So I thank you from the bottom of my giant piece of coal that I'm passing off as a heart. Thank you very much. You're all lovely people. And today is yet again another guest episode. And I'm saying that every week now because I haven't done a monologue one in a while where I just come on and rant over the airwaves and publish them. Sometimes when wine has been taken. But we'll not talk about that right now. But my guest today is a data analyst, a fellow autistic, just like me, and an author as well. So I can't wait to dive into this one to talk about all things kind of data science, data analysis, neurodiversity, positivity, book writing, and welcome to Michael Barton. How are you?
Oh, yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jude.
No, thank you for coming on to this pokey little neurodiversity show. The thrilled to have you here. And I suppose kind of the question mostly at the top of the episode, because everybody likes familiarity with these episodes, is I mean, what has your kind of ND journey been like up to the point where I opened up this session recording and hit the record button?
Right, so brief history of Michael Barton starts right about now. Kind of started aged 2, being diagnosed with PDD-NOS, that's pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. Reason for that was because I was non-verbal until I was 3 years old, and the diagnosis itself is quite broad, but at the time it basically meant I'm not developing in a typical fashion, which is very common for autistic children because autism is a developmental condition. Our brains don't develop in the same way and at the same rates as most people do. So going into junior school, aged 7, I then received a new or updated diagnosis of high functioning autism, but they said use strategies for Asperger's syndrome. I mean, nowadays it all comes under the autism umbrella, but back then, this was over 20 years ago, they wouldn't actually diagnose me with Asperger's because I was nonverbal as a young child. I had that delayed speech, which is why they said autism instead. But in my case, I see them as, well, you can use one or the other. So continuing on with my journey, I had speech and language therapy as a young child to bring my speech up to speed. I'd like to say, well, as I said, from age 7, it was all good in that sense, but just having like explicit lessons in social skills and understanding the world around me, as well as things like facial expressions and all the kind of stuff that I think every autistic child needs to be taught. And then obviously help with my exams come GCSE A level kind of time as a teenager. So by the time I went to university, I already had a reasonable understanding of social skills, other people, the world around me. And then it was, well, just from the social side of things, learning by experience. So I was on a good course studying physics at the University of Surrey, which is a really good university. And because I was in receipt of the disabled student allowance, I was able to receive additional support with things such as like note taking, revision, all that executive functioning kind of stuff, which autistic people often struggle with, even though I was perfectly capable of learning and applying all the formulae that you get within a physics degree. But from the social skills side of things, because I feel that's an important topic to cover, I did live in halls with other students, but I had my own room, which was, well, my own personal space. So I got a lot of, well, experience and learning social skills, making friends as you do when you're at university, but with the like my comfort zone being my own individual room that I could retreat to, and just having that like safety blanket, if you could call it that, was very beneficial to really, well, helping me hone my social skills while at university. And it was also at university when I published my first book, It's Raining Cats and Dogs, which is all about, well, literal thinking. So particularly as a young autistic child, people would say expressions on a day-to-day basis, which, because of the autistic literal way of thinking, would just be very confusing to me. So it was almost a guide to help myself understand the intricacies of the English language. So having an exercise book, I'd just write the expression, draw a picture of the first thing that came to my mind, and then my support assistant wrote what it really meant below. So because I have a mind a bit like a database, I could learn this means that, that means that. So just to help me understand what these expressions mean, because more often they're not intuitive. But we also found it was really helpful for everyone around me, my teachers, friends, and family, to understand that aspect of the autistic way of thinking. And when I, sorry, were
Oh
you going
no,
to
go
say
ahead,
something?
Michael.
Okay,
No, go ahead, go ahead.
a bit of a monologue, but well, we're known for that in a sense. So by the time I just graduated from university, I decided to have my second book, A Different Kettle of Fish, published about, well, just a short day in the life of. So it's a relatively short story, but just describing what it's like to be an autistic university student, going from my comfort zone at university into the hustle and bustle of central London, again with some more of my illustrations and drawings, but yeah, again, a short story into what it's like to be autistic, looking at the world through an autistic lens. Now, since then, I've gone into the world of work. I am one of the 29% of autistic people in employment. And yeah, working as a data analyst. I mean, I've worked in a number of companies over the past 7 years. And one thing I would strongly suggest for autistic people getting into work is, well, firstly, find a job and apply for jobs which aligns with your skill set. I've got a very logical and analytical way of thinking with a great attention to detail. So things like spreadsheets and coding are much more suited to my way of thinking than working in a job in retail, for example. And as I said, throughout my career, I've just been using my strengths, using the things that I can do to be the go-to guy for like coding and particular systems and just all that, just the kind of stuff that I'm good at, because nobody was successful by focusing on the things that they can't do. People become successful by looking at their strengths and focusing on them and using them in the right context. And that brings me to
No,
where we are today.
you know what I wanted to say, Michael, right?
What's that?
Is I'm sure you, like obviously you know you're an author, you've been on the book promo trail,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there to me, right? And if any broadcasters are listening to this and you think, does that apply to me? Then it probably does. You know, when you go on people's shows and they say, "Oh, I read your book and I loved it and all that," and they didn't fucking read your book. You know, they didn't read it. But do you know who actually did read your book?
Did you?
Right? I did. And you know what? I brought it here,
Did you?
right? Because we knew you were coming. We knew you were coming on, but somebody's took it home with them. Now, because there was a couple of things that
Mm,
I thought whenever I read your book and
mm,
I was going through it, you know, like some of the sayings in it, because I mean the way it's
mm,
kind of formatted in here, and I've brought
mm,
this up as kind of like a note, and it's a screen share, it's not live or
mm,
anything. But going back through it, Todd, I don't know if you can now, but things like sayings that I never got whenever I was younger, bear with me
mm,
was one. And I remember reading it, I was like, yeah, bear with me. Like, what does that mean? Because like I would take that literally. Or the drinks are on the house, you know, like different situations.
mm,
Because see, do you know what it's exactly like? This is the phrase that I would have for it. It's like a neurotypical phrase book
mm,
where I can't remember off the top of my head if it's in your book, but it's a saying I've never understood, which was out of the blue.
mm.
Something coming out of the blue. Is that in your book? I think it
That
is. I
particular
can't remember.
example isn't in my book. I mean, you've got the Oxford Dictionary of Idioms if you wanted a complete guide, but that's already this thick. Add pictures and you go into that thick. But it's raining cats and dogs as well, not quite as thick, but it gets the point across that autistic people have a very literal way of thinking, and we conjure up these literal images in our minds. But the problem is, these are everyday phrases that people, neurotypical people, use without thinking about how would this be interpreted in a literal sense.
Yeah, because with these, with with it's raining cats and dogs, and I'm sure you've had this experience as a writer, is it's a book that I read and I was like, I wish I wrote this. I wish
Mm,
I came up with that. where that's one example, and it's absolutely in my top 10 favorite books. And whoever has taken it from my desk, okay, this is an open warning. Now, this will be broadcast in weeks to come. They will be tried, they will be convicted, and they will be executed at dawn. Because I like doing that with people's books, showing them up and say, look, I like this and all the notes that I've made in it. And I'm trying to remember kind of on the fly what notes I remember because it's with it's raining cats and dogs, it's split into sort of sections. There's idioms, there's short expressions, uh metaphors, there's other sections. I can't remember them all, but I just remember even whenever I was young, and even sometimes now, what what things mean. Like, because language evolves all the time. And what I'd love to ask you, and this was the main reason, we accepted, we wanted you on, is there one in that book of these kind of neurotypical sayings that you feel is the worst? That you just hate it and you don't understand it and you don't know why people say it?
Oh, the absolute worst. I mean, that's why I have one of the sections is what I call classic idioms, as I've coined that term, in just you can't derive any kind of meaning from the individual expression as it is. I mean, a really good example, as you said, is bear with me. Like, the expression means to be patient with someone, but if you've got a half-tongued grizzly bear standing next to you, the last thing you should be doing is patient. You should get the hell out of there.
There was one that stuck out to me, and whenever I came across it in the book, I was thinking, "Oh my God, this guy's hit the nail on the head." When people say
That's one
that's
as
how
well.
you got it, is that's how the cookie crumbles.
Mm.
What does that mean? That's like even trying to explain it to somebody or people explaining it to me, people just say to me, and that's how the cookie crumbles, and it doesn't mean anything. A
It's
good
nonsense,
cookie
yeah.
should not crumble.
Mm.
A good cookie should maintain its shape. Now, the saying was, and that's how the shortbread crumbles.
Right.
I would maybe be okay with it. But see, the cookie crumble, because a cookie should hold its shape. You call it a cookie. It should have a doughy center. And, I don't get it because, with your first book, I know you have three books. And I
Mm.
know with the first one, I could talk about it all day, and I have recommended it to people in the past. I actually read your book in one sitting, and it was on a flight to Washington,
Mm.
where I had got it because it was one of those books that I. How long is it out now?
It's Raining Cats and Dogs has been out for just over a decade now.
It's a long time.
It came
I
out
think I
15th of December 2011.
I was thinking, when did I read that? It was maybe 2014 or 15. It was quite some time ago where
Mm.
I'd read it. And it was one of those things that it's just sat on the shelf in my house and
Mm.
never thought about it. And whenever you come up, Michael Barton, I was like, is that Michael Barton from this book? And obviously it was. Where I would encourage everybody, right? If you're to read a book, read that one. Where if you're kind of struggling with like neurotypical culture, it's probably one of, if not my favorite neurotypical culture book that I've ever read. I recommend it to everybody. I think it should be like a must read for people going into corporate. It is because that's where, because around 2014, 15, I was working as a social worker at the time,
Mm.
and I was starting to read more books like this. Now, it wasn't very many. Yours was one of the very few. And being a social worker, when you work in the NHS, right, they have their own language anyway.
Mm.
And a lot of the things in your book are things that are kind of normal social work language. And one that stuck out to me is something that nearly every social worker says, and I never said it and didn't know why people said it, was opening a can of worms.
Mm.
And I was like, what is that? What does that even mean? Whenever people said it, because I didn't hear that expression
Mm. But
until
that,
my
yeah,
mid-20s.
that's one way you can kind of somewhat maybe work it out, because opening a can of worms, you're going to have a lot of problems because you've got worms everywhere. And
Mhm.
obviously, opening a can of worms means like exposing a problem that becomes a really big problem. But another one that has almost the opposite effect, in my eyes at least, is it's a piece of cake, which which means it's really easy. But I mean, if you're trying to lose weight, it's not going to be really easy. It'll surely fuel any kind of weight loss. So yeah.
Yeah, like who comes up with these things?
I mean, what if you don't like cake? What if you're gluten intolerant? It's not going to sit well with you.
It's not going to be a piece of cake. And have you ever tried to bake a cake?
No, I haven't.
Well, I have, and it's not easy. If it was like, something easy, what's the easiest thing in the world to make? Hot noodle.
Mm,
That's really easy to make. Where with a cake, right, you have to sift flour, you have to
mm,
make a sponge, you have to whisk it, you need egg whites and sugar. And do you put yeast in cake? I don't know. You see,
mm,
I don't know. Like, so a piece of cake or a piece of piss,
mm,
which is, I was like, which is a derivative of a piece of cake,
mm.
but it's more slang term. Now,
Not very nice either way.
you're nice either. I mean, I don't really want a piece of piss, to be quite honest. I wouldn't fancy it. I
You
wouldn't I
can't really
wouldn't
have
be
a
talking about this.
you can't really have a piece of this anyway because it's a liquid. It doesn't come in pieces. It's just a quantity.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this and your piss does come in pieces, please contact your GP. And I was going to say about the other two books. I mean,
Mm,
you have two other books out, and I mean, because this is an experience I maybe had, and I don't know if you have this. Now, I've just released my third book, which is the
mm,
fourth book I've written, right? I've written four books.
mm.
I have one finished and shelved. I have one in progress, and then three out, right? So, with the second book, did you find your second book the hardest?
I'm gonna say I actually found my third book the hardest too. Right, the second book was a day in the life of just writing a short story about what it's like to be autistic on a day trip to London. And back in 2014, when that was released, I mean, there was still huge demand, as there is rightly so nowadays, huge demand for stories and autistic voices. So having a book about autism written by an autistic person was still relatively novel, even in 2014. But and said, my latest book, What Has Autism Ever Done for Us, released just this year in March 2022. Not only do we have like autistic people talking about all things autism nowadays, but also this is almost a bit of a different turn for me. Like, yes, my books have followed my life in a sense. It's Raining Cats and Dogs talking about the difficulties I had as a child. It's Raining a different kettle of fish talking about my time at university and going on a journey. But what has autism ever done for us is really a concept that I've had in my mind for a long time, taking a selection of famous people, past and present, and I am careful with my wording, saying what they have in common with autistic people. So looking at their various autistic traits and characteristics, people that have an above average number of autistic traits. Now, I'm using this deliberately for two reasons. Firstly, you can't diagnose someone as autistic posthumously. Like, it's one thing to speculate that Einstein maybe is autistic, but because he's dead, you can't actually go and get him assessed. And secondly, there are still some people alive today that are not diagnosed because of the stigma that still sits around autism and neurodiversity may not want to be diagnosed because there's still a lot of misunderstanding. Like, one thing that I mentioned quite near the beginning of many of the talks that I give is that autism is defined by the deficits that someone displays in social situations, but I've got two problems with that. Firstly, as an optimistic autistic person, I don't like being defined by what I can't do. And secondly, that doesn't say anything about what we're like when we're not in a social situation.
That's true, and you know what? Actually, believe it or not, I didn't know you had a book out this year. I didn't know. I didn't hear. I didn't hear about it. I suppose with this year, like there was a hell of a lot of books out this year.
Mm,
There really, really was. I mean, including one of my own, which was only a matter of weeks ago
mm,
that it came out. As you know what I always thought, right? And you popped into my head earlier in the
mm,
year. because I've done what you're saying about what has autism ever done for us, which was out
Mm,
this year. That's sort of a bit more of a different tone. It's like because with I wrote a novel and
mm,
it's very much an experimental third album
mm,
that has nothing to do with autism whatsoever. It's like a micro history novel of my
mm,
city and it centers on first aid. Like it's
mm.
just something completely left field, something completely different. But you seem to have kept the theme though with the third
Keeping
book.
keeping with the theme of autism, but one of the differences is, well, I'm not necessarily talking about people that are diagnosed as autistic, because when someone is diagnosed, if someone is diagnosed when they're older, let's say 40 or 50, officially, according to the diagnostic statistics, there's another autistic person that's been added to the list, but they've been autistic their entire lives. You don't become autistic because of a diagnosis. You have been autistic for your entire life. You'll continue to be autistic. It's just been confirmed and made official. So it's almost exploring, like, one of the working titles that I have for the book was Beyond the Autism Spectrum, because being autistic is just one component, one part of what makes you human. Obviously, it's expressed to different extents in different people, but it's just sitting somewhere along the human spectrum.
Another point as well, especially with your second book, and
Mm,
I didn't realize this. I didn't realize it until I actually just went on to my like Kindle app on the laptop, for a different kettle of fish. Is that
mm.
you also illustrated that as well?
Yeah, I mean, it came about similar. As I said, it was a bit of a follow-on from It's Raining Cats and Dogs. And if anything, people have said they like the more simplistic way of drawing. I mean, my drawing ability hasn't come on that much since I was 7 years old. But if anything, the simplicity is one thing that really sells the book. When I was originally approached Jessica Kingsley Publishers to get It's Raining Cats and Dogs published, one thing I had to do was compare and contrast it with other similar books out there. Now, one of the books that we had a very similar approach was called What Did You Say, What Did You Mean? But going by the pictures, you could tell, if you took one look at it, you could see it was written by a neurotypical person. What makes It's Raining Cats and Dogs different is that I would draw these pictures without any idea of what the phrase actually really means. Now, one really good example of this is if you were to draw the expression, they feel under the weather. Now, being under the weather means that you feel unwell, but I had a sun in the sky, there was a cloud as well, and someone just lying down sunbathing and they were happy. So, I mean, when I first drew this, my mum asked me, well, why are they happy? The expression means that they're feeling unwell. And I said, well, because it's a nice day, the sun's in the sky, why would you not be happy? But it shows that we think in a different context to neurotypical people. And I think that's one point that the book also gets across.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. And you know what? You know what I'm going to make a point of doing over the next week or so? I'm going to make a point of reading the first two again. Did you take a big gap between two and three?
Yeah, there was a big gap. I mean, as I said, it's just, well, getting all the stuff together. It's almost like a autistic case study of, I think it's 18 or 19 famous people. And especially when looking into people like Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher. I mean, his work is mind-bogglingly complex and people still debate it and discuss it even today. So just trying to condense an entire person's life into just a few pages, but putting that autistic twist on it, that can take a lot of research, and also just trying to make sure that I'm, like I said, I'm always careful with the way I word things, but especially when you're putting a case study forwards, putting it across in a book, I've just had to think a lot more about exactly how I say and articulate things in my latest book, What Has Autism Ever Done for Us?
And just to kind of put out there everywhere, I mean, with all of Michael Barton's books, they're all online. Probably every online retailer. I mean, it's published by Jessica Kingsley, so it'll probably be absolutely everywhere. And a good review on this because you know what, there's going to be an order going in for this as soon as the record button is stopped in the recording. There's a review in it That's a lovely one. And it's by Dr. Luke Bearden. It says, if you want to read a very well written, fascinating, well researched book and are interested in history, brilliantly discovered snippets of information, people have a sense of humor and curiosity and have an interest in autism and are willing to reflect on autism in a way very rarely portrayed in literature, read this. So, I mean, from that kind of review alone, I'll be absolutely ordering that as soon as we get off, because I'm quite happy to hear that there is indeed book number 3. And I know, and the second one you talk about, you went to university, was it Guildford? Have I got that
Yep,
right? Was it
that's right.
Guildford? And I mean, do you still have like a relationship with them? Do you speak to students and stuff like that?
I mean, I personally don't really keep in touch with that many people from university, but yeah, obviously going to university and living in Guildford is a noticeable part of my life, not just through getting a degree, but well, everything else, all the extracurricular stuff that you do at university. Like I said, making friends, joining clubs. Like university is not just about the academic side of things. It was by the time I went to university, aged 18, I had like a grounding, reasonable understanding of social skills, and those 4 years at university really helped me to hone my social skills.
And it's really positive. It's really upbeat. And what I will say is that I've had the, I suppose, combination of pleasure and displeasure. Is displeasure a
Mhm.
word? But if it isn't,
Yeah,
it is now.
no, it is a word, absolutely.
Excellent. So of reading a lot of autism books, and they all sound very, very similar. And what I would say, if you're looking to kind of read any kind of autistic written literature, I mean, I would go and check out Michael Barton for sure, because it's so different. It's so out there, where it's nearly so wacky that it works. Where you've gone to a really effective stage where I thought, whenever I wrote Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad and Loving Your Place in the Spectrum, I thought there's elements of these that are safe, that I wasn't ballsy enough to really, boom, to really kind of push the boat out there too much.
Mm.
And you absolutely have. So it is different. It's very, very ahead of its time.
I mean,
But I mean,
sorry,
oh, go ahead.
one thing I will say about just autistic people as a whole is that we are, as you said, just balls out. We want to be unapologetically ourselves, and certainly with my books, it's just like I want people to read this and know it came from me, not some other one person wrote it on my behalf. Like you're almost literally having a wire straight into my brain. Like this is what I am thinking. And yes, obviously, focusing on the positive aspects of being autistic is something people rarely talk about. I am careful not to deny that autistic people still need support. Not everything can be viewed through a rosy lens, but I think if you're reading about autism as a whole, you're not just going to read what I have to say. You read a whole bunch of other literature. So to have that positive message, this is what we can do when there's the right support put into place, I think I have my place in the world in that sense.
Absolutely, and I mean, as I say, I can talk to you all bloody day, but I suppose the last question I have for you, if people want to reach out to you, what are your .coms, your websites, your social medias, so people can interact, ask book questions, and so on?
No, I'm more than happy for people to reach out to me. I mean, my website is michaelbarton.org.uk. My Twitter and LinkedIn handle is michaelbarton22. And I recently got Instagram with the handle the Michael Barton.
Absolutely brilliant, Michael. This has been absolutely brilliant. I've loved every single second of this, and I can't thank you enough for coming on, and for all of you who have listened. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you next week for another episode of the Neurodiversity Gold Podcast.